What's up, everybody? I am David Grubb, and this is Hard in the Paint. The Heisman Trophy is truly one of the special awards in all of sports. It has a mythology and a history that few others can match. It also has its controversies, and yet only once has the Heisman Trust taken a trophy back from a winner. It happened to Reggie Bush following an NCAA investigation that said he took illegal benefits while at USC. That led to Southern Cal being stripped of more than a dozen wins and Bush returning that Heisman and being forced away from the program for a decade. The team over at Underdog Originals on YouTube has examined the Bush case and has come up with its own conclusions. Today, I'm speaking with Paddy Cotter, and we'll talk about what he's learned and what he's working on right here on Hard in the Paint. All right, everybody, I am joined by Paddy Cotter of the Underdog Content Network. And Paddy, welcome to Hard in the Paint first and foremost. Reggie Bush certainly has a lot of love in the Louisiana area, particularly because obviously his membership on the Saints Super Bowl championship team. He was the number 2 draft pick for New Orleans coming out of USC, and certainly one of the most high-profile rookies the league has ever seen. Here we are several years after the end of his career, and we're still dealing with maybe the most notorious Heisman Trophy case of all time. You've done a brief documentary on the latest in that investigation. First, what gained your interest in this story?
I just think it's such an interesting time for this story because the definition of what it means to be a college athlete is completely different than it was when Reggie Bush was going through all this stuff with the Heisman. So that context paired with an interest of like, okay, well, what were the facts around this case? What's the new information that's come out around this case? And the more I dug, the more I was like, oh, this investigation was horribly done, horribly executed. The facts were pieced together in a way that just helped the NCAA build a case against Reggie rather than getting down to the actual facts of the case. And so those two aspects, and then Reggie very much wants it back. He's made that very known on the podcast he's been on, which just makes me very interested to be like, okay, well, what's his argument here? And I think he does have a strong argument, especially in the current context of what it means to be a college athlete for getting the Heisman back.
What's interesting is I think the last real major milestone on this publicly was about 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago, where the Heisman Trust basically said, we're going to abdicate our responsibility on this. We're pushing it back to the NCAA. The NCAA says, we don't have anything that would say that we need to review what we did. So as far as we're concerned, this is done. The case is closed. It's clear that the Heisman committee would kind of prefer, because they basically said, if the NCAA says it's okay, we would gladly give Reggie his Heisman back. It seems as if the NCAA has really dug its heels in for the purpose of digging its heels in rather on resolving this situation.
Totally. And I think a lot of it has come down to some legal situations. In 2011, Todd McNair sued the NCAA for defamation because of the way they tied him to Reggie in the case of, organizing this marketing firm getting involved and essentially paying off Reggie. So he filed for defamation against them. And in 2015, the NCAA had to release all of their documents related to their investigation into Reggie Bush and his links to the marketing firm that he was connected to. And in that, it's fascinating going through these court filings and reading these email exchanges between all of these committee members. And it's so clearly biased. They're so clearly minimizing some details, maximizing other details, making up stuff, and very clear language that says, hey, we're going to make an example out of him. And however we can phrase things to make an example out of him, the better. So in 2015, when that became public, the NCAA clearly wanted to distance themselves from this story because it doesn't paint a pretty picture of how they went about deciding what the punishment was going to be for USC. So it doesn't surprise me that they're playing this hot potato game where it's like, well, if the NCAA says so, and the NCAA doesn't want this to be a story. They want this to go away because more people are going to find out about those court documents.
It's interesting. Can we talk about the investigation for a bit?
For sure.
Because, in the history of the Heisman, and we look at Cam Newton's investigation. We look at Johnny Manziel, and we've had other situations. We can go all the way back to the Oklahoma, situations in the 70s and 80s. There's always been some allegations of players getting too many benefits, whether they were Heisman Trophy winners or not. But we've never had an award taken, not for any personal transgressions. What was it about this case that the NCAA had to focus in on and made them so determined to get a win here?
I think it was a blend of a number of different factors. I think one aspect that's fascinating and that has drove it to the point where the Heisman was actually taken away was that the head of the Committee on Infractions for the NCAA was a guy by the name of Paul D. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
So he was the athletic director for Miami during their stretch of a lot of bad things that happened with Nev Shapiro, over 72 players receiving benefits, the Pell Grant program fraud case that happened, just a whole laundry list of all these bad things. And the NCAA named him the head of the Committee on Infractions. Have no idea how that decision was made. Blows my mind, and I've lost sleep over how insane that decision is. But at that point, D had a point to prove that he was going to be tough on any kind of athlete that went against the rules. And this is the new Paul D in town, and he's going to make an example out of Reggie Bush. So you combined all those factors, plus Paul D being the head of the Committee on Infractions. Reggie didn't stand a chance,
Is this really a public relations case rather than a substantive case? Because it doesn't seem that anybody really gets hurt out of this. I mean, USC took some scholarship punishments and things like that and forfeited 14 wins, but it feels like Pat Hayden at the time, who certainly was dealing with a lot in the USC program, it seemed like this was an easy way for him to get one of these things off his table, sacrificing Reggie Bush at the altar for the NCAA in order to protect himself a little bit, because he got to hold on his job a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we talked a little bit about Todd McNair. The only reason the NCAA was able to go after USC through Reggie, obviously the athletic department was dealing with other stuff that didn't have to do with Reggie, but the only reason that Reggie was a part of this was because they linked Todd McNair, the running back coach, to Reggie and said that these two are connected, and McNair is organizing these deals for Reggie, which proved to maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, but there certainly isn't the information to back that was true. Mm-hmm. The fact that link has been broken, and the NCAA, according to Reggie, has had to pay $8 million, is what Reggie said on a podcast, to Todd McNair as basically an I'm sorry for how we conducted this investigation. It makes that link between Reggie and USC extremely weak, which if that link was never made, USC wouldn't have had to take all these wins back and take a lot of their victories back and cut into their football scholarships. So it's crazy how it all unfolded, for sure.
What has been the thing that you've discovered that surprised you the most in this review of the case, and what's been the thing that probably disappointed you in your findings?
Totally. It's always amazing whenever you get to see email exchanges and text exchanges between these committees, because you have it in your head that it's being conducted, everyone's looking at the facts, you want to get down to the right answer, and you hope that for your, the country's judicial system too, is that everyone's observing the facts, there isn't this ulterior motive that's driving everything. And you get into the communications and you get into these emails and you're like, oh no, there's clearly an edge to this, there's clearly a desire to produce an outcome regardless of the facts. So that was really surprising to me. And on the Underdog Originals channel, we've done a couple other investigative pieces, especially on the Brett Favre misappropriating the welfare funds, and his text messages are very clear, and it's shocking to me. I was like, well, I can't even believe these people would text this information. So the more I get into these stories, the more I realize, maybe the committees and the decision makers, they're not actually looking at the facts. They're looking to produce a certain outcome and matching the facts to that outcome. So I found that to be the most surprising thing to me, for sure.
Why is the punishment consistently on the athletes? Like, that's the part that I've always wondered about NCAA punishments, is that the athletes suffer more. The long term damage to Reggie Bush being a former Heisman winner who had his trophy taken from him is far worse financially than anything USC gets from its brief time. They didn't have to turn the money back that they got
No.
from selling Reggie Bush jerseys and all the benefits that they gained. But Reggie is adversely impacted for the rest of his life. He doesn't get to go to the Heisman meetings. He doesn't get to sign his autograph and be Reggie Bush Heisman Trophy winner. Those things impact him in a way that no one else is. And I just don't if the purpose of the NCAA is to make sure that the athlete is protected ultimately, if that's supposed to be their purpose, it doesn't seem that they are aligned with that mission.
Totally. And the definition has changed because of that. And not because the NCAA wanted the definition to change, just because the Supreme Court said the definition has changed of what it means to be a college athlete. Yeah, and that's what makes this story so interesting to me is like the public perception is so different. I think at the time it was a little bit, I mean, a lot of the jokes were geared toward Reggie. And a lot of the angst about the entire situation was geared towards Reggie, where now I think it's very much towards the NCAA and towards USC and towards the handling of it. And the only thing that's changed is how we define a college athlete, which is fascinating.
Have we reached a stage, in your opinion, that because I think the NCAA is becoming, quite frankly, irrelevant. It doesn't really have the legislative powers that it had before. It has given up some of the enforcement powers that it had before, and it's kind of, it seems, looking to the federal government more and more to resolve some of its issues. I think eventually we're headed towards a place where NCAA athletes are considered labor and they will be unionized down the road.
Yeah.
If that's the case, when we look at this Reggie Bush thing, is the Reggie Bush the linchpin for what becomes ultimately the dismantling of the NCAA, excuse me?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure, but the more that those themes become relevant, the more that unionization becomes relevant. This will be a pinnacle piece, and it will be a piece in which the NCAA failed. And it will be a clear example of failure of their ability to conduct justice within their organization.
Ultimately, the hypocrisy of it that continues to fail the NCAA, because fans realize the players of the show. I think by and large, fans are getting that, and we're seeing the shift. The fans are okay with players getting paid. I think that there needs to be a regulation of it, but that's the NCAA's fault. They knew that this was coming and did nothing. Now, as we look back, do you see that the public is making that shift and saying the players like a Johnny Manziel, like Cam Newton, like Reggie are no longer villains in this?
Totally.
That they were just participants in a system this is how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the fascinating part of it, is like just the perception of these athletes. It's not looked down on anymore. And it's completely shifted to where a lot of people are supporting these guys. And it's also the fear of the unknown. So, what happens when we give these players NIL deals and they're able to just go around and make all these deals? Won't that hurt the integrity of the sport? It's like, no, actually things are pretty good and people seem pretty happy with it. And there's I'm sure there's nefarious things happening, but there's not some, secret bag man anymore. So that's like progress, if anything. So yeah, I think as more of those things advance, our perception will get, I think, better around what it means to be a college athlete.
What else is Underdog working on in other documentaries, and what is the focus that Underdog looks at when you are targeting different stories?
Totally. Yeah. Building out this channel, I was the one like motto I kept saying is I just want to tell the best stories in sports. Whatever the best stories are right now, I want to be able to tell them. So I thought the Brett Favre, story tells a lot about, these former players that can wield a lot of power in politics and pull a lot of strings and get a lot of funding for projects. And going inside the text for that were amazing. We have a piece on Zion's Nike shoe blowout that has performed really well, because that's just like a shocking story. It doesn't get talked about enough. So going into all these different stories and really, for a week to 2 weeks, it becomes my life. I dedicate myself to figuring out all the details around these cases. And that was the case for the Reggie thing. So we have a ton on deck, way more than I'm going to be able to do, because I'm just, I got a billion ideas, but you can only execute so many of them. So one that we've got coming soon is the surveillance system at Madison Square Garden. Dolan has implemented some security systems that, read people's face with artificial intelligence and decides who we're going to kick out and who we're going to keep. And if you're suing any of his properties, he will make sure to kick you out of the property very quickly. So it's created this, new conversation about ethics within a sporting venue, which is a rare conversation. So
I think you can have a lot of those conversations about James Dolan. A lot of ethics conversations about this. As a former Knicks fan, as somebody who used to follow the Knicks very closely for 4
years.
There
you go.
Dolan has been the bane of my existence for a good while. So I think there's a lot of digging you could do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So stories like that.
Yeah, honestly, that's why I do what I do. I got into the storytelling part because I felt like the dynamic had become so much about debating everything. That everybody had a hard and fast take on everything, that I wanted to get back more into the investigative, the storytelling, why do I love sports?
Totally.
And I think there's so many real things, particularly, and I think since the pandemic has made us be better storytellers because we got to pay attention to all the things that sports impacted while they weren't on the field.
Totally. I completely agree.
What's next? What else do you have, like, besides what's already on? What's something that you're really looking forward to looking at in the future?
So we've got the Knicks piece coming out. We've also got a piece coming out about Brittany Griner's prison swap situation, kind of going in more of the details and giving some historical context to how the State Department actually goes about negotiating these prisoner swaps and why the situation happened with her where, we traded one and they got, Victor Boot, and became this huge, debate within sports, weirdly, and politics on the values and why would we do this kind of swap. So I try and give some historical background to why that decision would be made like that, and the underlying narrative, the crazy essentially escape from Russia that she had. So
please tell the folks how they can keep up with you, your network, and all you got going on.
Absolutely. You can subscribe to Underdog Originals on YouTube. We have shorts coming out all the time. We've got new videos about every week to 2 weeks, telling stories just like this.
Man, I really appreciate your time. And I hope we get to do this again, because I have to go back through some of your topics that maybe we'll have a discussion again in the near future.
Absolutely. This is awesome.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, man. Once again, thank you to my guest, Paddy Cotter of Underdog Originals on YouTube, for joining me. Please check them out and subscribe to that channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button right here as well, so you can keep up with Hard to Paint, as well as the other great pods we have on HITP Sports Media, like Before the Whistle with Maddie Hudak and the Bird Calls. You can also follow me at DM Grub on Twitter and Instagram, and Hard to Paint is available wherever you get your podcasts. Like, rate,